Good morning, everybody, Anze, and happy National Aboriginal Day. I'd like to welcome you all to the signing ceremony to establish the National Research Centre on Residential Schools. I'd like to make a note before we begin. There are a couple places in the event where we're going to ask the media not to record. And there will be places where we ask everybody not to record. So if you would please respect that. There are portions of today's event which are ceremonial and in which we've been asked to keep them so. I'm Tina Keeper, and I am a member of the Norrie House Cree Nation, and I am an honorary witness for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And I am honored to be your MC for today's ceremony that is co-hosted by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the University of Manitoba. We would like to ask that if there are residential school survivors that are among us that are here today joining us, if you please stand, we would like to acknowledge you and recognize you. We humbly thank you for your courage and your contributions. I would like to acknowledge that we are in the territory of Treaty 1. It is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Today we gather on this land for a critical event, and it is critical to ensuring that we can move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and healing as a nation. At the tables to the left and on the screens, you will see samples from the Truth and Reconciliation collection. These documents, statements, and other artifacts have been collected by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission over the course of its mandate. This is just a small example of the full collection which will form the backbone of the National Research Centre. Even though this is a solemn occasion, it is also a time for celebration. We would ask that you please turn off your cell phones during this time and so that you keep them silent. And we are really pleased that you have joined us. We are quite overwhelmed that so many have joined us. And I think that is a testament to the spirit of what we are here for today. Our platform party, I would like to take a moment to introduce you. It includes the Honorable Justice Murray Sinclair, the Commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Dr. Mary Wilson, Commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Dr. Wilton Littlechild, Commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The Honorable Greg Selinger, Premier of Manitoba. Mr. Rod Bernouge, Member of Parliament for Winnipeg South. Dr. David Barnard, President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Manitoba. Dr. Digvir Jayas, Vice President, Research and International of the University of Manitoba. Elder Florence Painter, residential school survivor. And Mr. Phil Fontaine, former National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations and residential school survivor. Oops. Oh, I'm so sorry. I would like to also acknowledge other special guests who have joined us. The Honorable Aaron Selby, Minister of Advanced Education and Literacy. The Honorable Eric Robinson, Deputy Premier of Manitoba and residential school survivor. Tom McMahon, General Counsel for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Mr. John Morrisseau, Truth and Reconciliation Survivor Committee member. Janice Lederman, Chair, Board of Governors, University of Manitoba. Pat Bovey, Vice Chair, Board of Governors, University of Manitoba. Dr. Joanne Kesselman, Vice President, Academic, and Provost, University of Manitoba. Mr. John Kiersey, Vice President, University of Manitoba. Mr. Paul Cochin, Vice President, University of Manitoba. Dr. Emeka Sazmori, President Emeritus, University of Manitoba. Deborah Young, Executive Lead for Indigenous Achievement, University of Manitoba. I would like to now introduce Elder Gary Robson. He is a member of the Peguis First Nation and a residential school survivor. Elder Robinson, who is also an elder in residence at the University of Manitoba at the Aboriginal Student Centre, will be saying our opening prayer. Kitchimigwach, Elder Robson. I would like to now invite Inuk Elder Lavinia Brown to the stage. Lavinia was born in Dawson Inlet. Elder Brown is a residential school survivor, and we are honored that she is with us today. She has enjoyed a distinguished career in public service. Elder Brown served as the first woman mayor of Rankin Inlet and as deputy premier for Nunavut. Please join me in welcoming Elder Lavinia Brown, who will light the kudlik for us today.
Ublakun ammalo koyan nami tagbanin napsi makua kuri de uwani trukta koyan nami ale anay. I just said good morning, and I'm very thankful I'm here with you all today, and I acknowledge every one of you, especially the survivors out there and our guests behind me sitting up here. Very nice and very well organized. And I must thank all the people who organized this event. And of course, it needs all the ingredients to make this event happen. It's a historic signing ceremony, and not to forget the survivors and the parents. For I have felt how my son was taken away, how it was painful, and giving our trust was a big part of our life. Given the trust to look after those sacred children, that they would be in the hands of trusted adults. But it didn't happen like that. We had many tears, and our hearts were broken when our children were taken away. The survivors, you are very strong people. It makes our country today of what it is. And I thank the commissioners of TRC very much, because they're leading us on to good things where everything will be documented and it will be implemented in school to teach the children the history of our country. And the big part of this is that the residential school that were existing 2010, many people weren't aware of what residential schools were, because they asked me, what is that? I have to do my own part, a little bit of teaching here and there. And I thank the government of Manitoba very much, because they play a big important role too in recognizing the survivors, all the universities, the colleges, they work in collaboration to implement healing process and to make sure that we all belong. Before I light the kudlik, I like to recognize the president of Red River College, Stephanie. Could you stand up, please? Thank you. As I light the kudlik, I will explain a little bit about this oil lamp. It's called kudlik. I don't have seal oil, but I do have something in here that works the same, but it's modified. My husband is very good in providing me and helping me behind scenes, and this is a bottle from Old Spice. And it's very good for storing my oil in there. Don't tell anybody, it's Crisco oil. Us Inuit people had to modify everything just like anything else, because a lot of us been in residential school and we learned different things. The kudlik was used inside the igloo, and it was the woman that was the fire keeper. She had to make sure the sea oil was clear, no particles in there. Of course, she put a little bit of fat, a little bit of meat for the smell. That was the only difference. And everything came from the land before, like the soapstone. It's not going to burn because this is solid stone. And the wicks were from the ground, pushy willows. The women gathered them and put them in bags so that she would have enough throughout the season. Roll them up, put them as wick. And the soil, you see the soil is black. It's the same soil you dig from underneath your ground. Pretty well the same thing. And the kudlik was used for light, heating, and cooking. And they made the tea here, sitting up there with stick in the snow. This oil lamp never melted the igloo, the snow house. Because the women, they knew how to maintain it, not too much heat all the time, just enough to have a little bit of warmth. Otherwise, it would melt the snow and you'd be seeing the sky and the moon. We didn't want that to happen, so we had to learn to be very, very careful with our oil lamp. And the men were the providers. This morning, we had a very nice ceremony, pipe ceremony and water ceremony. It was very peaceful and got your thoughts together. And an honor song was very, very lovely. When we had ceremonies, of course, we had feast, and the men had to be the first to eat. So in our culture, the men were our providers. They bring the animals and the food to us women. And in turn, the men respected the women. That's why they always came back with their hunting. And the men returned. The camps were run by the women. And the children and the women were always safe and healthy. Men, women, each had survival skills that were so important for us to survive. The men, they went through hardship too. They went hunting out on the bay when the ice was hardly formed. In the ocean, the ice, when it's forming, is different than the lake. The lake froze solid, and the ocean, because it's salt water, it goes into a wave. The men had to risk their life to get the seal for this. And women go through the same thing. They go through hardship. So we're all equal in the sense that our survival was important to be careful and to live. So I will light this now, and I hope it works for me. Because sometimes it gets a little stubborn, like my matches. When this is happening, we usually have a lot more flames than this, but I only have some there just to have it going. And in ceremony, the audience is there looking down on this and witnessing this. It's just like the pipe ceremony and the water ceremony this morning, how collective and calm it was. And it gets your thoughts together. You're thinking about your loved ones, praying at the same time for your loved ones who might be ill, who might need your support and prayers. And of course, the Creator will guide us. And we pray for our sisters and brothers who might be struggling from other abuses and who are lost. My son, oldest son, went through residential school. And I trusted the authorities. And here he was severely abused, sexually abused. And yet, he went on with life. He graduated from high school. He went on to school. In fact, when he graduated from Fort Smith as a first business and administration student, Commissioner Marie Wilson was there speaking at the graduation convocation. And today, my brother, who was severely abused, became a psychologist with a degree. Now, he's on his way to Victoria to write his exams for master's degree if he can get it. I'm very proud of him. We have lots of young people who are graduating all the time. We thank them because a lot of them come from residential school parents and themselves. I like to honor them, the survivors. And I'm done now with my lighting of kudlik. There you see it. It's got lots of flame. And sometimes it will go light up the whole thing. But I'm going to shut some off because it can heat up pretty fast. I might have just one flame on. So I'm done now. Thank you.
I would like to thank, once again, Elder Lavinia Brown. And I want to thank both elders for sharing with us today their personal stories. There is often a sense, I think, that this is part of our history, but it's very much a part of our lives. And so for most Indigenous peoples, we've all been affected. And our families, our loved ones, whether it's immediate family, extended family. And so I thank them for sharing those personal stories with us today. I'd like to now introduce to you Chief Wilton Littlechild. He is a commissioner with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He is the first Treaty First Nations person to receive a law degree from the University of Alberta, and he was the first Treaty Indian person to serve as a member of Parliament. Today, he will speak about the heartbreaking subject of children who were sent to residential schools but never came home. Please join me in welcoming Chief Wilton Littlechild.
Good morning, all of your excellencies, dignitaries, survivors, and I see maybe some fellow students. It's an honor for me this morning, and I'm very happy about today as a series of ceremonies are occurring. Early in our mandate, we committed ourselves to hold our work as a sacred trust for the children that were taken. And since we began our work, we've heard many times, many different stories and testimonies about the different ways the children were taken. We were called by parents saying to us, "Please, Commissioner, go find my child." We heard sad stories about children dying in schools. Stories about children taking care of each other. Seeing a schoolmate sick or sitting beside a schoolmate that was sick in school. Sometimes seeing them being taken to a hospital, never to see them again. We heard about children from an elder who lived by the school, a non-Indigenous person, say to us, "I used to see children burying children at the school." We heard about unmarked graves. I remember a grandmother saying to us, "I remember a little teddy bear being held by a classmate of mine who was so little she was always picked on. And I remember her clutching that little teddy bear as she died in my arms, and I was 9 years old." Some died from disease, some from beatings, some from loneliness, homesickness, and yes, some died with a broken spirit. Those that went missing as they were running away from school to run away from the abuse, only to drown trying to cross a river, or dying as they fell through the ice, or freezing to death, to die from accidents or suicide. We heard from those parents who were left behind, not knowing what happened to their child, a loved one, or even where they were buried, wondering, did they have a proper funeral? Did they have a fast? Did they have a wake for my child? Was there a traditional feast for my child? Not having a chance to say farewell because they never came home. We invited the child spirit to help us in our work. Many times we would have an empty chair in the circle, sometimes two empty chairs for the boy child and the girl child in our hearings. In some communities, we would remember them in prayer. In some, we offered a traveling song to free the spirit of the child, to accompany them on their spirit journey. So this special day, a special day when we honor those children, over 4,100. In fact, we now know at least 4,134 children who died at those schools. And that number is growing. So as the elder did, I ask you now to pause for 4 seconds. 4 seconds for those children. And from the 4 directions, we offer thanks. Ninanaskomun, 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 Ninanaskomun. Allow me now to introduce Mr. Carl Stone. Carl Stone is a student advisor at the Aboriginal Student Center and a member of the Broken Head Ojibwe Nation. And I ask you please for this part, no cameras and no videotaping. Mr. Stone will sing an honor song in memory and tribute of the residential school students who never came home. We thank them, we free their spirit, and we thank you all for your understanding. Hai hai naskum na gakyo.
Here's going to in this because my can do them. wasting their money.
Miigwech, Carl Stone. The Honorable Greg Salinger, the Premier of Manitoba, joins us here today to bring greetings on behalf of the provincial government. Premier Salinger is an alumnus of the University of Manitoba and a strong support of post-secondary education. Please join me in welcoming Premier Salinger.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm honored to be here today on Treaty 1 territory to congratulate the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the work you've done in bringing these archives to Manitoba. I think that's very significant for us, and I want to congratulate the President of the University for the work on the behalf of the University to make this happen here in this great province, because so many of the stories, so many of the tragedies, so many of the practices that have been documented and put into the archives are going to be important foundation knowledge for the future of what we need to do together to move forward. And I can remember teaching a course with Emma LaRocque on when we introduced material on the residential schools, and this was a while ago, but I do remember the tremendous reaction of denial among many of the students that these things could not have happened and did not happen in Canada. And so much has happened since then to break through that denial and to come to a sense of acceptance that these practices and tragedies did occur. And the stories that have been documented bear witness to that. But it's fundamental that we understand these things in order to find the best way forward to restore respect for language and culture and sovereignty, and the recognition of the partnership we have and the need to work through the treaty process in a modern way to establish the kinds of lives we want for all Manitobans and all Canadians. So this is an important day. I'm honored that it's happening in the province of Manitoba, and I want to thank all of those people involved for making it happen, for the success you've achieved, and acknowledge the elders and survivors here today as well as we move forward on that path towards reconciliation and dignity for all people in our country and in our communities. Thank you very much.
Miigwech, Premier Salinger. I'd like to now introduce Winnipeg South Member of Parliament, Rod Bernouge. He is the Member of Parliament for Winnipeg, and he joins us today to bring greetings on behalf of the Government of Canada. MP Bernouge was elected in 2006 and was immediately appointed by the Prime Minister to the role of Parliamentary Secretary to the Department of Indian Affairs. His first task was to assist his government in finalizing the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement and to ensure its passage in a brand new Parliament. Member of Parliament Bernouge is a member of the Métis Nation and is an alumnus of the University of Manitoba. Please join me in welcoming MP Bernouge.
Miigwech, Tina. It's an honor to be on this stage, an honor to be introduced by Tina Keeper, whom was a fantastic member of Parliament, and I miss the days she sat with me in the House of Commons, because she was a really wonderful woman and was always quick to laugh, usually at me, but we miss you, Tina. Great lady. It's a pleasure to be here. I just want to honor the elders that have done so much today, not only here at this important ceremony, but earlier today at the water and pipe event, which was very moving, as has been everything with the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, the archives, and of course, all the information that we've found out about the survivors. I've really been honored to be a part of it in a small way, and as politicians, we like to think that we're important and also key to things happening, but just to quote Elder Swain from this morning, there's a much larger plan here, and we politicians are just a very bit player in it. The great Creator clearly wanted this to happen here today, and so I give thanks to that. While both Tina and I were in the House of Commons in 2006, when many of these things were voted on, our government had a great partner in that, and the leadership shown by the national chief at that time was instrumental to delivering what was such an important historical moment for Canada. And I just want to honor Phil for showing leadership and being someone that I can truly look up to as an Aboriginal mentor of mine. So I just want to thank you, Phil, for everything. But behind the scenes, there are so many people that worked on the important agreements that were signed that led to today's announcement. And I wish I could acknowledge them all, but I would very much like to acknowledge a young lady who's done so much for this important center, somebody that has been helpful to me and I think has done so many great things for the University of Manitoba. And of course, that's Deborah Young. She deserves a great round of applause. On my first day on the job, I waltzed into Aboriginal Affairs, the Indian Affairs building, not really knowing where the bathroom was. And in a room full of people that really didn't know anyone, there was one kind Manitoban face, and that was Deborah. So her and I got along quite quickly, and I thank you for helping me find the bathroom. We saw many great things happen in those first few years of our government, but upon the completion of the settlement agreement and its passage in the House of Commons, there was the important work of setting up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And unfortunately, early on, it looked like it was going to see some significant roadblocks, and it came to, unfortunately, an abrupt halt. And I just have to acknowledge the incredible work and leadership of Justice Sinclair and his fellow commissioners who took on a project that had a really difficult start and managed to turn it around, which has led to so many great things happening, but also today's wonderful announcement here at the U of M. So thank you, Justice Sinclair. I just want to close by thanking a few more people, but I want to acknowledge Dr. David Bernard's work. He has shown a real wonderful vision for this campus. He's taken over and filled some very large shoes by the President Emeritus, who's here, Dr. Sathmary. His vision to bring an Aboriginal, Indigenous context to this campus is something that I think is going to really speak to the nation, and I think today is really the beginning of that era. So I just want to thank Dr. Bernard for showing your vision. I appreciate it. Thank you. And perhaps most importantly, I want to thank the survivors, some in my own family. Many in this room have family members that are survivors, and not only those that survived, but of course those that were lost. It's their memory that we want to acknowledge and keep forever, and I look forward to keeping it here at the University of Manitoba. Thank you.
Miigwech and Paper News. The Honourable Justice Murray Sinclair is Chair and Commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Justice Sinclair grew up in Selkirk, Manitoba, and is a graduate of the University of Manitoba Faculty of Law. He was Manitoba's first Aboriginal judge and served on the Provincial Court and the Court of Queen's Bench in Manitoba. In addition to serving as Commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Justice Sinclair was also co-commissioner of the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry in Manitoba. Please join me in welcoming Justice Sinclair.
I was going to start applauding. I didn't realize they were introducing me. Bonjour, thank you for that introduction. And welcome to all of you for being here. I'd like to thank you all for your attention and for your participation in this day. This is a very important day for us at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I'm going to tell you in a few minutes what that's all about and why it is. But I always wanted to remark upon the fact that whenever we have a gathering like this, there's always someone in the room who doesn't know what this is all about. And so I'm going to remind you just a little bit about why we have a TRC. About almost 30 years ago, I guess, but 25 years ago for sure, the survivors of Indian residential schools began in their discussions to consider the fact that many of them had cause to complain about the way they were treated. And I always challenge the crowd to think about things in this way. Imagine what it would be like if one day, without your knowledge, without your consent, without your participation, representatives of the government came to your house and started to take away your little children. Imagine what it would be like today for those of you who are in this room if they came and started to take away your grandchildren. And in doing that, they told you and let it be known to you that they were going to stop them from speaking your language. They were going to stop them from learning your culture. They were going to prevent them from seeing you because they didn't trust that you would be able to raise them properly. They were going to hold them from you for as long as they could, but at least until they were adults. And then they might be returned to you. And they might be returned to you not only as adults, but they'd be returned to you married, because some of the schools would require the children to marry each other before they left the school. And that was done because the government's policy was that Aboriginal people were inferior, Aboriginal people were heathens, were savages, were pagans, and were not as qualified to be Canadians until they had gone through this process. And therefore, in order to bring them into Canadian society, they had to first be raised up into a state of civilization through a process that involved Christianization. I had the occasion recently to address a convocation at Ryerson University in Toronto. And I realize, David, I'm mentioning a competitor here, but please forgive me. But at that event, which is the university, incidentally, that's named after Dr. Egerton Ryerson, who many historians credit as being the architect for the thinking that went into residential schools in Canada. I commented upon the fact that in the convocation that I observed, there were about 30% of the graduates who were Indigenous people, not only from Canada, but from other parts of the world as well. And I said, when you look at the writings of Dr. Ryerson, after whom the university is named, you will remark upon the fact that his view was that Indigenous people were incapable of being educated at a university level. And that's why they needed to be educated through industrial schools. Schools that would teach them manual labor so they could work with their hands. Schools that would keep them at a low level within the economy. Schools that would prevent them from becoming the full potential or meeting the full potential of being a full Canadian society. And I said, I wonder what Dr. Ryerson would be thinking today as he observed all of these Aboriginal graduates who are going through here, some of them with PhDs, many of them with master's degrees, all of them with bachelor degrees, all of them dedicated to working in the various professions in Canada. I don't know if he was spinning in his grave, but at least I would hope that he would have had second thoughts about his thinking, because today we know that Canadian society has had to have second thoughts about this policy. To put it simply, for the government to take children away from their families for no good reason other than to indoctrinate them into a different way of thinking is wrong. It was wrong then. It was not acknowledged to be wrong then, but it should have been. It was acknowledged now that it was wrong, but now we have to deal with the aftermath of all of that. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission came out of the Residential Schools Settlement Agreement, which resolved all of the lawsuits that had been started against the Government of Canada and the churches who ran the schools. There were significant abuses that occurred within the schools. People were badly injured physically as a result of what occurred in the schools. But everybody who went to those schools was damaged emotionally and psychologically. The trauma of being indoctrinated into another culture, into another society, forcibly against your will, and also to be institutionalized away from your family, away from those people who loved you and those people whom you loved, to be taken away from your communities and to be isolated from them for all of your childhood and to be released back into those communities and not being able to function properly within them was devastating to each and every one of those children who came out of the school system. As well as they were able to cope with what was left to them in terms of their life, nonetheless, they lost something. They lost something of great value to them. They lost their sense of self. They lost their sense of identity. They lost their sense of spirit, and they lost their sense of direction. They no longer knew where they came from. They no longer knew where their people came from. They had no idea of where they were going. They had no idea of why they were here, and they had no idea of who they were. They tried hard, many of us all tried hard, to join this society and to be part of it, and many of us have succeeded, but at great cost to our own sense of self. And now we know that we can do something about that. But it begins with the truth. It begins by acknowledging what happened, and it begins by knowing as much as we can about what happened. And if we are able to uncover those truths, and if we are able to uncover all that we know about what happened and how things happened and why things happened and where they happened and who they happened to and who did them, if we are able to do that, then and only then can we turn to the major focus of the future, which is reconciliation. And reconciliation is about what can we do about this now? What can we do about the fact that all this damage has been created? One of the first steps in that process is to understand that it wasn't just Aboriginal children who have been damaged by this history. It's all Canadians who have been damaged by it. This is not just an Aboriginal problem. At the same time that those children were being placed in institutions and being educated, that they were inferior and that they came from inferior cultures and irrelevant languages, non-Aboriginal children in the public schools of this country were being told the same thing. And inadvertently, unconsciously, and perhaps unintentionally, but perhaps intentionally as well, they were being taught to believe in the superiority of their own ancestors, the superiority of their own culture, the superiority of their own communities, and that therefore they had a right to be there. They had a right to govern. They had a right to be in charge. At one of our gatherings, a survivor stood up in response to a question about what reconciliation means, and he said, "I'm not sure, but I sure wish these people would stop acting like they own the place. They need to talk to us about where we fit into that ownership question." Reconciliation is going to be a hard thing to achieve, but remember this, residential schools were in existence for 150 years almost. It may take us that long in order to fix all of this, in order to address it properly. But it begins by acknowledging what the vision of reconciliation must be and where it must take us. And as commissioners, we have agreed that we must look towards establishing or reestablishing a relationship of mutual respect which would have been here at the time of first contact. When Europeans first came to this part of the world, they needed Indigenous peoples in order to survive. They needed Indigenous peoples in order to understand what they were able to do, how they were able to live on this land. And in order for that to happen, there had to have been a relationship of mutual respect. And reconciliation calls upon us to move back into that direction. But I think before we can get there, we also need to talk about how we can give self-respect back to the children and the grandchildren of those many generations of survivors who have been abused emotionally, psychologically, and physically by residential schools. And in order to do that, we have to start talking to and about Aboriginal people in a more respectful manner. That involves changing the way we educate our children. It involves changing the way that we govern this country. It involves changing the way that we are Canadians. It involves recognizing what Canada is all about. All of us want to be able to stand up and say that we are proud to be Canadians. Every single one of us, I assure you of that. Indigenous people are not going away. And those who live in this country and have been here now for generations are not going to go away. And those newcomers who are arriving here are not going to go away. So in order for that conversation to make sense, we all have to come to a common understanding about what it means to be Canadian, and what it means to be Canadian in the context of this story as well. The importance of the National Research Center that is being established here today through this agreement is that it will be a constant reminder to all Canadians about what the foundation of this relationship became, of what it is that we are working away from. It will be a reminder to all future Canadians that indeed what we have heard from survivors in the past 10 years or so did happen. We are creating a national memory here for all Canadians to be able to rely upon, because we know that if we do not do that, then it will be just a matter of 2 or 3 generations from now that most Canadians will not only be able to forget that this occurred, but they will be able to deny that it occurred. And that can never happen. That must never happen, because this is part of what Canada is all about. The National Research Center was an obligation that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was mandated to create as a result of the Indian Residential Schools Settlement Agreement. And because the TRC is going to end its mandate in 1 year from now, we knew that there had to be an ongoing obligation imposed upon the National Research Center to continue some of the work that we ourselves had commenced while we were in place. And part of that obligation is being assumed by the University of Manitoba here today in its agreement to undertake the establishment of the National Research Center. And I'd like to thank the University of Manitoba and all of those who worked with us for beginning this journey with us at this point in time. It began for us when we were privileged to hear the apology that was issued by President Bernard to all of the survivors at the Halifax National event in October of 2011. And at that point in time, when the President stood up and he talked about the importance of an academic institution taking responsibility for the way that it educated its students to ensure that they were capable of challenging those things in society that needed to be challenged, the message was very clear. It was very strong. And while that was not the factor that resulted in our making a decision to have the institution placed here, it was a factor that showed us that there was a very strong commitment at the University of Manitoba to advancing the cause of residential schools and the survivors and the issues that they raised, and to establishing the University of Manitoba as a center for Aboriginal excellence in the country. But in addition to that, we also knew that from the proposal that we had received from the university, it was head and shoulders above some of the other proposals that we had received, because it talked about the importance of establishing this as a national center. This is not just about Manitoba. This is not just about Western Canada. The National Research Center for Residential Schools has to be about Canada. It has to ensure that all of Canada will benefit from the things that are going to occur here. As a TRC, we have been given the responsibility to collect all of the statements that we can from the survivors who are still with us, and we have undertaken and continue to do that work. We have now over 6,000 statements that we've collected. We have others that we are going to try to collect as well. that we know exist out there. But in addition to that, we have been given responsibility for gathering together the relevant documents relating to residential schools that currently sit in the archives of the churches and the government who are responsible for the running of the schools. That has not been an easy process because of the magnitude of the work that has been involved. It's a large effort that we have imposed upon the churches. It's a large effort that we have imposed upon the government as well. And some of the resistance on the part of government to providing us with those documents had to do with the magnitude of the work. But we have convinced them that it's worthwhile. And we know now that those documents are going to flow. We know that they must flow. And we know that they must be put in a state that all future generations of Canadians, including generations of children and grandchildren of residential school survivors, can have access to them so that they will know what happened to their ancestors. They will know why things are the way they are. Reconciliation is going to be a long and difficult process. As I said, it took 150 years for us to get to this point. It may take us that long to be able to say that we have achieved a relationship of mutual respect. But nonetheless, in order for us to do that, somebody has to take care of those documents in the meantime. Somebody has to ensure that all of that information is protected for those future generations. And the National Research Center is that institution that will do that. But in addition to maintaining the records and archiving them and making them available, we also have asked that the center undertake work in the area of research, new research relating to residential schools, new research relating to public education, dialogue, and putting together exhibits and issues relating to ceremonies as well around the access to the exhibits, access to the documents. We've also asked the National Research Center to continue to collect the stories that have been provided to us by the survivors themselves, but not only by the survivors, but by the intergenerational survivors. The children and the grandchildren of residential school survivors are the ones who are living with the full legacy of the impact of the schools, because they are the ones who no longer speak their language. They are the ones who have lost their sense of culture. They are the ones who are still looking for a way to be all that they were intended to be. Continuing the collection of documents, not only from the government and from the churches that ran the schools, is an important undertaking, as well as from other sources that the Commission has not been able to access to this point in time. We know that there are documents in the hands of provincial governments. We know that there are documents in the hands of private collectors. We also know that there are documents in the hands of private museums, libraries, Aboriginal organizations, and individuals. We also have asked the National Research Center to assist Aboriginal peoples in the exercise of their rights under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, because that United Nations Declaration, in our view, is a sound framework for reconciliation in this country. And I commend to you, all of you, particularly those who are students here at this Center of Learning, to familiarize yourself with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, because it will be at the forefront of all discussions between First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people and the governments of this country for years and generations to come. We have also asked the National Research Center and the University of Manitoba, who supervises its existence, to fulfill the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, which issued its report in 1996 relating to a national repository of records, not just relating to residential schools, but relating to all issues around Aboriginal history, Aboriginal people in this country, including such things as the forced relocation of Aboriginal communities, the development and evolution of Aboriginal history generally, issues relating to Aboriginal governance historically and at present, issues relating to Aboriginal women, issues relating to the Métis, and issues relating to the protection of traditional knowledge. Everyone knows that the history of residential schools in this country is simply a part of a history of assimilation that goes beyond the schools themselves. As I have said in the past, it takes a village to raise a child, and they took the children of Indigenous families away from their villages but then the government set out to destroy those villages as well through legislation. And the destruction of those villages through the passage of laws that limited the powers of leaders, that prevented the development of economies, that prevented the development of the community in terms of its infrastructures, is quite significant and explains to a large extent why there are poor roads and there are poor houses and there are no jobs and no economies and no entrepreneurs and no businesses in Aboriginal communities throughout Canada, because the government made it virtually impossible for them to come into existence. We are proud to say that the National Research Centre, through the agreements that will be signed today, will have a governing circle that will have a majority of Aboriginal people in charge of making decisions and assisting the university in its role as well with regard to the supervision of the centre. We know that in doing so that that will involve people who will ensure the spirit of truth and reconciliation that we have talked about, and the memory of the children who pass through the schools, and the respect for Aboriginal culture and then the usefulness of it for future generations will be ensured. We would like to thank all of those who have guided and contributed to the process of conceiving of the National Research Centre, including the survivors who commenced all of this through their court actions, forcing Canada and the churches to enter into that settlement agreement which I have mentioned. We would particularly like to thank the Aboriginal leadership in this country who led the fight to ensure that the settlement agreement would be reached, that litigation would be commenced and conducted in a positive way. People such as Nora Bernard, Marlene Cloud, leaders such as Phil Fontaine, who is here with us today, and Charlene Beaulieu, and Willie Blackwater, all of whom were major players in the early part of the litigation process. We'd also like to acknowledge and thank the many good and honorable people within government, within the churches, who acknowledged that what was going on at the time that they were involved, not only in the conduct of the schools, but also in the conduct of the litigation, needed to be reconsidered so that Aboriginal people and the issue of reconciliation could be put in the forefront of thinking, and that matters could be resolved in a way that was less damaging, not only to the survivors, but to the country as a whole. I would like to acknowledge the children of the survivors who have endured so much and who now have a chance to understand what has been done to their parents and to their grandparents. And we'd also like to acknowledge the role of the media in all of this. The fact that the media has played a role in publicizing the information that relates to residential schools and educating the public generally needs to be understood. And the role of the academics in the university settings and throughout the country has also been significant. There is more information written in the last 5 years about the state of affairs of Aboriginal people than was written in the previous 100. That's an amazing view of how things are evolving. We need also to thank all of the survivors who shared their stories with us and who have agreed to allow us to archive those stories. We acknowledge that not all survivors were ready to give us their statements and have given us their statements, but we know that there are difficulties that many people still face about talking in a public way or even in a private way about what has happened to them in the schools. We would acknowledge as well all of the churches who have opened their archives to us and the government who has opened their archives to us for our research purposes and also to provide us with copies of the documents that we will now be housing. We know that the future of the National Research Centre is being placed in good hands because when we undertook this work as commissioners, we committed ourselves, as Commissioner Littlechild has said to you, to undertaking this work as though it were a sacred trust, because it was a sacred trust. And in fact, the documents that we will be signing today here are called trust documents. The reason why the University of Manitoba and other partners involved with the university are being called upon to sign those documents with us is because as commissioners, we will cease to function. We will no longer be in existence in a year from now. And as a result of that, some other entity needs to undertake this work and to carry it forward. And we are asking them to carry it forward with the same sense of trust, sense of sacred trust that we have brought to this work in time. and that has been well understood by those who have worked with us at the university. And in particular, I'd like to thank President Bernard for his personal commitment to the evolution of this agreement and the development of all that has been taking place with regard to its signing to this point in time. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you for being witnesses here today to this event. It's important for us to know that your support is here. It's important for us to know as well that there is a commitment that is reflected in your attendance here on the part of this university to continue this work. And so, on behalf of myself and my colleagues, Commissioner Littlechild, Commissioner Wilson, I say miigwech to all of you.
Miigwech, Justice Sinclair. Dr. David Bernard is President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Manitoba. Since he was appointed President of the University of Manitoba in 2008, President Bernard has been a leader in advancing issues that are critical to the success of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students. Please join me in welcoming President Dr. Bernard.
It's a real privilege to be here today with you. Those of you who are friends and colleagues will know that I've not made it through any set of remarks on this topic in the past without emotional difficulty, so I expect to feel something from you to help get through this one. We are humbled and honored by this announcement on National Aboriginal Day that the University of Manitoba will host the National Research Centre for Residential Schools. And I really want to thank the Truth and Reconciliation Commissioners for showing confidence in the university and the proposal that we've made and our partners that we will be responsible keepers of the stories you've gathered and the conclusions you will make that will help us move forward from this dark period of Canadian history. We believe here that at the university that this National Research Centre will help our country move forward on a path of reconciliation and healing. The University of Manitoba offers a strong commitment to Indigenous students, a powerful educational role in challenging settler attitudes to facilitate reconciliation, and a central geographic location. The university has world-class research and archival expertise and formal partnership agreements with national Aboriginal organizations, academic institutions, and other important organizations. I'd like to acknowledge our partners, many of whom have representatives with us today. The University of British Columbia, represented by Dr. Link Kessler, Director, First Nations House of Learning, and Senior Advisor to the President on Aboriginal Affairs. The Legacy of Hope Foundation. The University of Winnipeg, represented today by Jennifer Rattray, Associate Vice President of Indigenous Government and Community Affairs. Lakehead University. Red River College, represented today by President Stephanie Forsyth. University College of the North, represented by Dr. Sherry Peden, Vice President, Academic and Research. Université de Saint-Boniface, represented today by the Rectrice, Raymond Gagné. The National Association of Friendship Centers, represented by Jeff Sear, the Executive Director. Archives Manitoba, and the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, represented by Tricia Logan, Curator of Indigenous Content. I also want to acknowledge our remarkable committee of scholars and staff from across the university, co-chaired by Dr. Lara Fitzner and Dr. Jean Friesen, who developed an excellent proposal that enabled us to become the permanent home for this center. We truly appreciate their hard work and commitment. And there are many others, many of whom I see in the audience and some who are not here today, who have worked diligently on this file. I would like to mention a couple of others, in particular Karen Busby and Helen Falding, who worked very hard on this, and I'm proud to be part of this community of scholars. Although I really should have a degree if I want to be up here with these other people. Maybe I can rectify that at some point in the future. Innovative digital technologies will allow survivors, scholars, and others to use the records to tell many stories. the story of residential school survivors, of families, of communities, of schools, of regions, and of the countries. And the statements that are being collected will form the heart of this archive. The collection of archives and testimonies truly belongs to survivors, their families, and their communities. We will strive to ensure accessibility to all users, but especially to these survivors and families, so that they can learn about their history and the history of their communities. This center will also be made available to scholars from our university, our province, our country, and around the world. Our goal is to ensure this center is used by as many people as possible. We want teachers to share these stories with students and parents to share stories with their children. Since many of our most important and poignant lessons come from our children, I believe all of us can learn from the unique insight they will gain and share from accessing this National Research Center. During Truth and Reconciliation Commission national and regional events, we've heard the heartbreaking accounts from survivors about the devastating impact that the Indian residential school system had on their lives. We all have a responsibility to acknowledge that our national government devised a system that took children from their families and attempted to rob First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples of their languages, their cultures, and their communities. These actions resulted in the governments of Canada and Manitoba issuing statements of apology, as well as churches that operated schools, including Roman Catholic, Anglican, Presbyterian, and United Churches. As the Commissioner already mentioned, in October 2011, the University of Manitoba was the first post-secondary education institution in Canada to offer its own statement of apology and reconciliation. We failed to recognize or challenge the forced assimilation of Aboriginal peoples and the subsequent loss of their language, culture, and traditions. We apologize, and it remains our intention, having said the words of apology, to move to reconciliation. Today, on National Aboriginal Day, Canadians from coast to coast will celebrate the cultures and communities that the government once tried to extinguish. This is true evidence of the strength of its First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. This collective strength and individual resolve does not negate the impact of these schools. We have a long way to go to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and restore trust that is broken down and is critical in building a society where we are all welcome, valued, and included. As part of our role in achieving reconciliation, the University of Manitoba is working with a variety of partners to make Manitoba the National Centre for Indigenous Education and Research. Schools need to be places where First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students are safe and accepted and welcome. For reconciliation to occur, it's all of our responsibility to make that happen. Together, we can ensure that Indigenous students are prepared for and achieve educational success in the full range of academic programs we offer. It's my sincere hope that we can enable the final chapter of our national story, yet to be written, to be one that's inspiring, positive, and full of hope, where Indigenous people are full participants in schools, universities, workplaces, and public institutions. Some years ago, William Butler Yeats, an Irish poet, wrote these words: "Had I the heavens embroidered cloths and wrought with golden and silver light, the blue and the dim and the dark cloths of night and light and the half-light, I would spread the cloths under your feet. But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly. You tread on my dreams." If we had the perfection of creation, we would give it to each other. But we have the brokenness of our shared history. Infused with dreams.
Agasani Miigwech, President Barnard. I'd like to acknowledge that wisdom and that compassion in making this day possible. And I would like to also acknowledge what has been shared here today. When the residential school settlement agreement was tabled in the House, I had the great privilege to speak on behalf of my caucus to the settlement agreement. And at a very difficult time because of my family's history. Both my parents are residential school survivors. And one of my family members, who is a survivor, told me, "You must have compassion. You must have compassion. We are in this together, and people that have done these things, they need to know it's wrong, but they need to know that there is a way that we can heal together." And I'm so forever grateful for those words, because they helped me through that day, but it is reflected deeply in the spirit of what Dr. Barnard has just shared with us, so I thank you for that. I'm going to now invite Lavinia, Elder Lavinia, up to the stage again to relight the kudlik. The reason we are going to relight the kudlik is so that it will remain a light in the ceremony of this signing.
Thank you very much, Tina, and thank you for the speakers. Those are very strong words, very healing words. I just wanted to explain a little bit about my kudlik. It shut off, but it served its purpose well. You know, I started from one end, and all by itself, the flame went to the other end, from left to right. It was lit the whole time. And when it finished its course, it shut off itself. And that's what it's supposed to do, because sometimes women inside the igloo, they fell asleep when they were on guard of the kudlik. So that's what happened here. I fell asleep on my chair.
We'll just give Elder Brown a moment. Ayasani. Thank you, Elder Lavinia. We will now proceed with the signing of the formal document for the National Research Center. I will call upon the signatories in order, and I would request that they return to their seats once they sign the document. Chief Wilton Littlechild. Dr. Marie Wilson. Dr. Digvir Jayas. Dr. David Barnard. Justice Marie Sinclair. Miigwech. I will now call on the witnesses to sign the document. Again, I will call you up in order, and I would request you return your seat once you have signed the document. Premier Greg Salinger. Oh, let's hear them. Elder Florence Painter. Mr. Phil Fontaine. Miigwech. I will now call upon Elder Lavinia Brown to sign the document. I will now call upon Mr. John Morrisseau to sign the document. Oh, Sunny. The document is now signed. I am going to now ask that we just take a moment. There's going to be an exchange of the document, and we will be doing a special photo op with all the signatories and witnesses. So thank you. It'll just be a moment. Truth and Reconciliation Commissioner Dr. Marie Wilson has more than 30 years of professional experience as an award-winning journalist, trainer, and executive senior manager. She has lived, studied, and worked in cross-cultural environments for almost 40 years, including Europe, Africa, and various parts of Canada. Please welcome me. Please join me. I'm sorry, Marie. Please join me in welcoming Commissioner Wilson for the transfer of a special blanket from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to the University of Manitoba.
Well, since you ask, welcome, Tina. I give thanks for this day to the Creator and for the grace that has brought us all safely to it. I wish you all a blessed Aboriginal Day, distinguished guests all. I want to say a special greeting to all the survivors, the intergenerational survivors, and of course our elders from many cultures gathered here. And if you will allow me, I also want to say happy birthday, because today is the 5th birthday of my little granddaughter, Sadeya. Her name, her Dene name, it means little sunshine. So it's a beautiful solstice name on this blessed day. And unlike Justice Sinclair, I'm not yet tired of smiling. I'm so thrilled with this day, and I'm so pleased, in fact, that this milestone is being marked on a sacred Aboriginal day, on a sacred solstice day, because so many people have worked so hard. And when I say so many people, I'm talking first and foremost about so many little children who have worked so hard over the 150 years of yesterdays. The children of today, some of whom have birthdays, but some of whom have lots of positive and tough legacy to bear. And of course, the children of tomorrow, for whom we are all doing this work. We have been going across the country for the past 3.5 years in the context of work which both of my commissioner colleagues have shared with you, we have identified as a sacred trust. And in the context of that work, from coast to coast to coast, we have been making promises. We have promised survivors and intergenerational survivors and those who worked at the schools and ordinary other Canadians who have found words that they needed to share with the Commission. We have promised them all that we were receiving what they had to give us as a sacred trust. And we promised them that it would be kept for posterity and that it would be accessible to their children and grandchildren and our grandchildren and theirs, so that what we have come to learn, what we have begun to no longer deny, we will never forget, and that our country will never be able to say that this did not happen. That is the tremendous importance of this National Research Center as a sacred repository, both physical, of course, here at the University of Manitoba, but also virtually in the ways that it will be shared out in the generations to come with all those across the country and beyond our own country who care about our work, who have followed our work, and who have been part of it. Many people have spoken to us in their own words, but many others have found their voice through poetry, through dance, through songs, through musical compositions, through plays, even through ballets, some of which that are still in the works. All of these gestures capture a version of a collective truth that we are building. We have also received things which we ourselves have commissioned. And one of the things that was commissioned was a magnificent piece of art called the Living History Quilt Project, the Living Healing Quilt Project. It was a series of 3 tableaus that was presented and prepared and coordinated by the Curve Lake First Nation in Ontario, led by Alice Williams. And it involved women of Inuit First Nations and Métis background, and it captured in those 3 tableaus very important aspects of the residential school experience. In doing that project, those survivors who did the work said that they were doing it for all survivors. And so it is a gift from survivors to survivors that was entrusted to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Today, as just one example of the many artifacts, spoken and written word and audio recordings which we will be entrusting to the University of Manitoba and the University of British Columbia and all of the partner academic institutions which President Bernard talked about, we want to make clear that we are not giving a gift of a blanket in that traditional sense. We are exchanging and extending a trust. It has been entrusted to us, and we are extending that trust to those who will receive it today, to keep our promise as commissioners alive, that the stories will be there for posterity and that they will be accessible for the generations to come. The blanket that we are handing across, is called Child Prisoners. And you have seen this beautiful quilt that is hanging behind us, which is another in the three-part series. And that one is called Schools of Shame. And I encourage you to have a chance afterwards to have a closer look at it. But for now, we will be transferring this quilt, and I would ask Dr. Bernard and Dr. Jayas to come forward to receive it, and I would ask my fellow commissioners to help me in transferring it to them.
Miigwech, Commissioner Wilson, President Bernard, and Dr. Jayas. Elder Florence Painter is from Sandy Bay First Nation in Manitoba, and she is a residential school survivor. She is currently Elder in Residence at Miigwech Agamek, the Bald Eagle Lodge at the University of Manitoba, and provides traditional teachings to groups, individuals, and organizations. Please join me in welcoming Elder Painter.
Bonjour. Josh Kubineshi kwa Disnekas Makwa Dana Magan. Miigwech Dikit Kabmi Nabishinan Nongam Gagi Shigum. Ajib me Wabandaman Minong Kegub me Ashte mi Yang Chimino Indigoing Asianishnave Yang Wasing Gaji Jamagak, the Jibago Sandan, Memendige Ungoe, Gini Johnson Andik, Washanson Andik, Gidinemagan Andik, Wika Junikas Yacht, Aningavi Jevizian, Kinama Degamigam. I first want to acknowledge the Creator, and I also want to acknowledge my traditional name and my clan. And I also want to extend my gratitude to the people that have made it possible for survivors to tell their truth and to be believed in the messages, in the stories that they shared. I know a mother's heart, a mother's love runs very deep, and she will do anything to help her child or her children. I know because when we would leave for school Sundays, my mother was not able to face us as we left our homes. And I often wondered about why is that she wouldn't wish us, bid us a good time at the residential school. She was a survivor herself. And I know the tears she must have shed in silence as we left for a school that was 3 miles away from my home. And how other communities, other families must have gone through the same thing. A community that really took pride in raising all of us, our extended families being a big part of that. And not being able to continue doing the things that we were being taught at home, being asked to leave it at home because those were the languages were not good languages, is what lots of us were led to believe. And we were also led to believe that anything of us, anything that made us who we were or who we are, was cut off from being taught in school. So many of us, many of my relatives, many other students that went to school didn't have the same opportunity that I had. And I think about the work that has gone on for us to be able to share our stories. And I will never forget that first day that someone came to my home and we listened to the process. And during that whole process, I could not stop crying. For the life of me, I could not stop, because it's the first time anybody's going to take my story down. And it's going to be the very first time that I'm going to hear my husband express his sorrow, express the same things that I had gone through. But we tried to live and continue to live the way that I was taught. And I was so fortunate to have met so many grandmothers, so many elders that took their time. And as I stand here, I know that I carry those ancestral voices. I carry those ancestral teachings that were so part and parcel of our daily lives before residential school. I know that because I had good memories of that, and I still live those memories. But not only do I live those memories, I carry them and I teach them to other people. And I've also been in a situation where I listen to other people like myself, and I lend them my support. And I know where they're coming from too. And I mentioned that, or at least I want to mention that we still dream about those places. We still go back to those places in our dream world. And it's painful. You could be walking, or you could be enjoying life. All of a sudden, there may be a trigger. And then again, we're consistently healing ourselves, our own minds, our own bodies, our own spirits. And I appreciate the tears, the emotions that have been expressed throughout today. That means a lot to us that continue on this journey that we will always be on. But today is about healing. It's about being able to find a place where I know many of our people are feeling the safety net of coming to talk to us, the elders, that work with the university. People that don't know anything about the history of residential school. People that don't know or don't even have an idea this happened in Canada. And I think it's important that we carry it and that we teach it and continue to teach it, because that's our history. A history that we want to remember for the sake of the people that didn't have that same opportunity, that never made it out of the residential schools, that lost their lives there. And to the people that are survivors, I encourage you to continue talking. It's good to be able to find a place where you can talk about it, because the more you talk about it, the lesser that you let yourself be able to feel that healing. We have lots of brothers and sisters, our elders, that are there to help us. We go to those special places. And I believe this transfer of this historical moment is very sacred to us. We've done everything in the most sacred manner that we know how to do in today's context, in this special day. Again, thank you for shedding the tears for our people. I used to be a real crybaby, and anybody that knows me can attest to that. And I began to understand the reason I would cry is because many of our people weren't able to cry. We were told not to shed any tears. So even if we were getting a licking, we would have our hand out and we wouldn't let out a sound. We were silenced for a long time. Use your voice, use your inner strength, use the things that our people survived for us. Pick up those things. That's what's going to continue our path. And we do this on behalf of all the people in the four directions, because we are all impacted by it. And we will continue to live, and we will strive just like our people did at one time. I thank you for being here. I thank you for the opportunity to be here. I am very happy to be part of this special day. Kinanakuminim, miigwech kitninim, manidui gigajrenimigwa, amigwech.
Miigwech Elder Painter. Mr. Phil Fontaine is a member of the Saugeen First Nation and is a residential school survivor. He is a University of Manitoba alumnus and is former Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs and National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations. He is the longest-serving National Chief of the Assembly of First Nation in Canada's history and was elected 3 times. As a leader, Chief Fontaine shared his personal experience, and he lobbied for recognition of the truth of this history and for justice on behalf of residential school survivors. His efforts have made reconciliation a shared vision for all of us. Please join me in welcoming Chief Fontaine.
Thank you very much, Tina. This has been a pretty happy day, and I'm going to make you happier yet by being as brief as possible. The reason we're here at this very special moment in our collective history is because of the tremendous strength and the incredible resiliency of our people. And I'm so very proud that I've been a small part of this incredible journey that we've traveled together so far. And as we were reminded by the Chief Commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we still have a tremendous distance to travel, but we are going to do it together. So that gives me great comfort. Thank you so much. Miigwech.
Get you miigwech, Phil Fontaine. I was just getting relaxed over there. Thank you. We are now joined by the Edmund Partridge Community School Chamber Choir. The choir will sing 2 selections, The Water is Wide and Count on Me. Please join me in welcoming the choir director, Tim Friesen, and drummers, Mikhail Sati and Emily Santisiri. Good. Do you want some water? Oh, yeah. Yes. Okay, here, bro. Yeah. I know I want to choke something else. I know it's awful.
I cannot cross
everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Friesen, and to the Edmund Partridge Community School Chamber Choir. One more round of applause for them. I would like to now invite up for our closing prayer Elder Norm Fleury. He is from St. Lazare, Manitoba, and he is a national elder for the Métis National Council. He teaches Michif at the Brandon University and is in the process of interviewing Michif Métis elders in order to preserve their language, their history, and stories. Please join me in welcoming Elder Fleury, who will say our closing prayer.
I'd like to say thank you for this wonderful day. Thank our Creator, our God, and also giving me that opportunity as a Métis elder to participate in this event that we have today, because I've heard stories as a child about people from St. Lazare going to Lebret Residential School, and my great aunt who was married into the Gambler First Nations and her children. And I could hear my grandmother and my aunties and my mother and my uncles talking about all the hardships. And they went and left, and they're gone before us. My mom passed away 3 years ago at 108 years old. And my grandmother and grandfather, which had the opportunity to have my upbringing with them in St. Lazare, and we learned about who we were, and especially my language, Michif, which I still have with me, and I thank our Creator for that. And it's so nice to be here because so many people are the familiarities, the people that I've known in the last many years, Elder Florence, painter who I went to school with at Brandon University, and we're here, and many people here that I know, and it's a great honor, and I thank my friend John Morso, who gave me the opportunity to be here before you today. So with that, gaya mihan, kishpenwi ni pawi ego ni pawik, kishpenwi api ego apik. Umani istagagi mi gawian manitu, chinistotato chik, chinistotao chik, ni istagwan man dapat stanegwa, malang limitsif kay sinikkatek. Nimiyay tena nos manitu tagani pawian, ebe yachi moyan istage kakwechimitin kwa yeshchuichi yan anos kwa yeshchayami ayan. Le bon Dieu manitu merci de toi anos. Utaganak skato yak. Ashaway minan tapitaw. Kanaway minan. Wichinan kwa yesh chimamu atuske yak. Mina chinishtuhtato yak. Piskaba minan. Niyanan kagi pakit niyak manito. Wichinan yanan kagi timak siyak. Kagagay kaskitamar siyak kumagagi ishpaye. Kagi pegik timaagak manito. Kaya chumanih kayak tandega uschiyak. Kakchi demo yak manito. Wichinan. O God, our Creator, we ask that you remain with us always, especially at this historic time of healing and understanding. Under your guidance and wisdom, we shall seek to live in harmony with one another. We shall seek to work together in spirit of mutual respect, cooperation, and goodwill, and thus make Canada the place to live in for all people. God, our Creator, give us courage. Let us be one mind and make us righteous, thankful, and proud. Help our Aboriginal nations and other nations to work together, especially utilizing our elders as teachers and preparing our youth for the future. God, our Creator, provide us with direction and inspiration as we build a road for the Aboriginal nations and other nations in this country. We must have strong families in order to have strong nations. Let us not forget all our relatives that have gone before us. God, our Creator, Manitou, help us to retain our languages and our culture. Let us not forget who we are and where we come from. And today, as we go on our pathways and we go on in our lifeways, O God, our Creator, remain with us in our thoughts and in our minds in our healing on this journey in empowerment. And we continue as friends of this country so we make a strong place, O God, for all of us in this country. Merci, miigwech pedama edo, miigwech ninarskomun.
Kitchmiigwech, Elder Fleury, and thank you for your closing prayer and for your closing acknowledgement of the survivors, and for this historic event, your prayers. Participants for today's program are now available for one-on-one interviews, and you can all stay. You're welcome to stay and join us for a light lunch, and please have a wonderful afternoon. Happy Aboriginal Day, and thank you all for joining us today.